The crisp morning air filled Sarah Mitchell's lungs as she stepped out of her modest suburban home, her athletic bag slung confidently over her shoulder. At 28, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had faced life's hurdles and emerged stronger. The early Georgia sun cast long shadows across her driveway, where her pride and joy awaited. A sleek, silver Audi modified with cutting-edge adaptive controls that had taken years of savings to acquire. Sarah checked her watch. 7:45 a.m. The Paralympic Training Center was across town, and her coach had emphasized the importance of today's session. International scouts would be present, evaluating potential candidates for the upcoming World Championships. After 3 gold medals, Sarah knew the pressure of expectations, but she embraced them like old friends. The car hummed to life as her fingers danced across the specialized controls. Each modification represented a triumph of engineering and determination, allowing her to navigate Atlanta's busy streets with precision. The morning traffic was lighter than usual, and Sarah felt a surge of optimism. Perhaps she would make it to training with time to spare. As she navigated through downtown, Sarah's mind wandered to the young athletes she would mentor later that day. Their faces always lit up when she shared her medals, their eyes wide with possibility. It was these moments that meant more to her than any podium finish, the chance to show others that limitations existed only in the mind. The speedometer crept up as she merged onto Peachtree Street. The training center was just 10 minutes away when red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Sarah's heart sank. She hadn't been paying attention to her speed, too caught up in thoughts of the day ahead. With practiced calm, she guided her car to the curb, reaching for her registration and license before the officer approached. Through her side mirror, she watched him pause, studying her car's modifications with obvious curiosity. His hand rested instinctively on his belt as he approached her window. "License and registration, please," the officer requested, his tone professionally neutral. Sarah handed over her documents, including her Paralympic athlete identification. The morning sun caught the metallic edge of her latest gold medal, partially visible in her open gym bag on the passenger seat. The officer barely glanced at her Paralympic ID, his attention focused on writing up the citation. "Do you know why I pulled you over this morning?" he asked, his pen scratching against his notepad. "I apologize if I was speeding, officer," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I have an important training session this morning with international scouts present. I'm a Paralympic athlete, and this is a qualifying day for the World Championships." He paused for a moment, looking up from his notepad, but his expression remained unchanged. "Rules are rules, ma'am. I'm going to have to issue you a citation. You can either pay the fine or contest it in court." He handed her the ticket, along with her documents, and added, "Slow it down next time." As the officer walked back to his patrol car, Sarah glanced at the citation and sighed. The fine would put a dent in her training budget, but she knew she had a choice to make: pay it quietly or stand up for herself in court. Her fingers drummed thoughtfully on her specialized steering controls as she watched the patrol car pull away. The dashboard clock now read 8:05 a.m. She was officially late for training, but as her coach always said, champions aren't defined by their setbacks, but by how they respond to them. With renewed determination, Sarah signaled and pulled back into traffic, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring. 2 weeks later, the Fulton County Courthouse stood imposing against the cloudless Atlanta sky. Sarah Mitchell navigated her way through the security checkpoint, her gym bag containing not just training gear, but a collection of accomplishments that told her remarkable story. The security guard noticed her athletic stance as she passed through the metal detector, offering a friendly nod. The marble hallway echoed with her footsteps as she made her way to courtroom 304. Her coach, Marcus Thompson, had insisted on accompanying her, trailing a few steps behind. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," he'd said that morning, rearranging his packed schedule to be there. In his hands, he carried a leather portfolio containing newspaper clippings, photographs, and documentation of Sarah's achievements. It was 9:45 a.m., and the courtroom was a hub of quiet activity. Legal assistants shuffled papers, a clerk typed rhythmically at her computer, and a few early arrivals for their cases sat scattered among the wooden benches. Sarah found a seat in the second row, her posture reflecting years of athletic discipline. Judge William Barnes entered precisely at 10:00 a.m., his black robe flowing as he took his place behind the bench. At 62, he carried the weight of 2 decades of judicial experience in his bearing. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an air of authority that commanded immediate respect in his courtroom. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice resonating through the chamber. Sarah stood with the others, noting how Judge Barnes organized his desk with mechanical precision, a habit formed over thousands of cases. He began reviewing the morning's docket without looking up, his pen making swift notes in the margins. The first few cases moved quickly: parking violations, minor disputes, and traffic infractions. Sarah observed how the judge handled each case with efficient detachment, his responses almost automatic after years of similar proceedings. She noticed his tendency to glance at his watch every few minutes, marking time like a metronome. "Case number 2024-TR-156, the clerk announced. "Sarah Mitchell, charged with exceeding posted speed limits on Peachtree Street." Sarah rose gracefully, making her way to the defendant's table. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, catching the subtle gleam of her Paralympic ring, a symbol of excellence she wore daily. Judge Barnes looked up briefly, his expression unchanged as he scanned her file. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, his tone carrying the same measured cadence he'd used with every other case that morning. "I see you've chosen to contest a speeding ticket issued on March 7th. The officer's report indicates you were traveling 15 miles above the posted limit. Do you have any explanation for the court?" Before Sarah could respond, Marcus shifted in his seat, the leather portfolio creaking softly as he prepared to stand. Sarah raised her hand slightly, a gesture asking him to wait. She had faced tougher challenges than this, and her voice remained steady as she prepared to address the court. The judge's eyes remained on the file, his pen poised to note her response. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the usual shuffle of papers and whispered conversations falling silent. Through the windows, the distant sound of Atlanta traffic provided a subtle backdrop to this moment that was about to become much more than a routine traffic hearing. Sarah squared her shoulders, the same way she did before every race, every competition, every challenge she'd ever faced. This courthouse was just another arena, and she was ready to tell her story. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Sarah stood before Judge Barnes, her hands clasped respectfully in front of her. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast alternating patterns of light and shadow across the courtroom floor, a visual representation of the moment's complexity. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice clear and measured, "I understand the seriousness of following traffic laws. That morning, I was heading to an important training session." Judge Barnes looked up from his papers for the first time, his reading glasses perched at the tip of his nose. "Ms. Mitchell, everyone who comes before this court has somewhere important to be." His tone wasn't unkind, but it carried the weariness of someone who had heard countless similar explanations. "I respect that, Your Honor," Sarah continued, reaching into her bag. "I have documentation here about the training session. It was a qualifying event for—" "Ms. Mitchell," the judge interrupted, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on his desk. "The issue here isn't where you were going, but how you chose to get there. I see from the officer's report that you were driving a modified vehicle. Can you explain the nature of these modifications?" In the gallery, Marcus shifted forward slightly, the leather portfolio growing tighter in his grip. Sarah could sense his protective instinct, but she gave him a subtle gesture to remain seated. She had faced bigger challenges than this. "The modifications are specialized adaptive controls, Your Honor. They're necessary for—" "Are these modifications street legal?" Judge Barnes interjected, peering at the officer's report again. "I see no documentation here about authorized vehicle adaptations." Sarah reached into her bag once more, retrieving a folder of official papers. "Yes, Your Honor. I have all the required certifications here. The modifications were installed by an authorized specialist and are fully compliant with state regulations." The judge accepted the documents, scanning them with practiced efficiency. His expression remained neutral, but there was a slight furrow in his brow as he reviewed the paperwork. "These seem to be in order, but that doesn't address the speeding violation. The officer's report indicates you were traveling at a considerable speed above the limit." "I acknowledge that, Your Honor," Sarah responded, her posture remaining composed. "I was focused on reaching my training session, where international scouts were present to evaluate." "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Barnes sighed, placing the documents down. "This court sees many young people who believe their circumstances excuse their actions. The law applies equally to everyone, regardless of their appointments or schedules." The sunlight had shifted now, illuminating the collection of medals partially visible in Sarah's open gym bag. They caught the light briefly, sending a flash across the courtroom, but the judge's attention remained on his papers. Marcus stood slowly from his seat, the portfolio now open in his hands. The sound of his movement drew the attention of the bailiff, who took a step forward but stopped when he saw the dignified way Marcus carried himself. "Your Honor," Marcus spoke, his deep voice resonating through the courtroom. "If I may approach the bench. There's additional context about Ms. Mitchell that I believe is relevant to these proceedings." Judge Barnes looked up, presumably to dismiss this interruption, but something in Marcus's bearing made him pause. The courtroom held its breath as the judge considered the request, his years of experience warring with his curiosity about what this well-spoken man might have to add to a simple traffic case. The morning light continued its slow dance across the courtroom floor, about to illuminate a truth that would transform this routine hearing into something extraordinary. Judge Barnes considered Marcus's request for a moment before nodding. "Approach," he said, his curiosity evident in the slight tilt of his head. Marcus moved forward with purpose, his steps measured and confident as he carried the leather portfolio to the bench. "Your Honor, my name is Marcus Thompson," he began, opening the portfolio with practiced care. "I'm the head coach at the Atlanta Paralympic Training Center, and Ms. Mitchell is one of our most accomplished athletes." The judge's eyes flickered between Marcus and Sarah, who stood quietly at the defendant's table. "Paralympic athlete," he repeated, the words carrying a new weight in the hushed courtroom. Marcus withdrew a glossy photograph from his portfolio and placed it before the judge. The image showed Sarah on the winner's podium at the last Paralympic Games, gold medal gleaming against her team uniform, the American flag raised high behind her. "Sarah Mitchell holds 3 world records in Paralympic track events," Marcus continued, his voice filled with quiet pride. "The morning of the citation, she was rushing to a qualifying event where international scouts were present. These scouts determine who represents our country in the upcoming World Championships." Judge Barnes picked up the photograph, studying it with growing interest. The stern lines around his mouth softened almost imperceptibly. "And the vehicle modifications mentioned in the officer's report?" "Specialized adaptive controls, Your Honor," Sarah spoke up, her voice clear and confident. "They allow me to compete at the highest level of my sport and maintain my independence. The car itself is a testament to years of hard work and dedication." Marcus placed another document on the bench, a newspaper article with the headline, "Local Athlete Brings Home Gold, Inspires Community Youth." The article detailed Sarah's work with young athletes, particularly those facing physical challenges. "Ms. Mitchell doesn't just compete, Your Honor," Marcus explained. "She mentors dozens of young athletes, showing them that their dreams are within reach." The morning in question, she was not only heading to her own training but was scheduled to speak to a group of aspiring Paralympians afterward. The judge removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully with his handkerchief. The morning light now filled the courtroom completely, casting everything in a warm glow. When he replaced his glasses, his gaze fell on Sarah with new understanding. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, his tone markedly different from earlier. "Why didn't you mention any of this when we began?" Sarah straightened her shoulders, a gesture familiar to anyone who had seen her prepare for a race. "Your Honor, I've learned that true respect isn't demanded, it's earned. My achievements don't place me above the law. I only hope you'll understand that my urgency that morning came from a place of commitment to my sport and my community." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the courtroom. The clerk had stopped typing, her fingers hovering above the keyboard as she watched the scene unfold. Even the bailiff stood straighter, a look of admiration crossing his usually stoic features. Judge Barnes sat back in his chair, taking in the complete picture before him, not just of a traffic violation, but of dedication, perseverance, and service to others. The morning light caught the edge of Sarah's Paralympic ring, sending a small rainbow dancing across the judge's bench. "I believe," the judge said slowly, "that this court would benefit from hearing more about your journey, Ms. Mitchell." He gestured to Marcus to share more from his portfolio, ready to learn the full story of the remarkable athlete who stood before him. Marcus continued to share documents from his portfolio, each one revealing another layer of Sarah's remarkable journey. Judge Barnes leaned forward, his attention fully captured by the unfolding story before him. "This," Marcus said, placing the worn photograph on the bench, "was taken at Sarah's first Paralympic qualifying event 6 years ago." The image showed a younger Sarah, determination etched on her face as she prepared for a race. She finished 4th that day, missing the team by 0.2 of a second. Instead of being discouraged, she doubled her training efforts. Sarah watched quietly as Marcus shared the photograph that had hung in their training facility for years, inspiring countless young athletes. The judge picked it up, studying the fierce determination in her younger self's eyes. "The modified vehicle mentioned in the citation," Marcus continued, producing a magazine article, "was featured in Adaptive Sports Quarterly last year. The modifications represent a breakthrough in adaptive driving technology. Sarah worked with engineers for 2 years to perfect the design, which is now being adapted for other athletes across the country." Judge Barnes examined the article, his eyes widening at the technical specifications. "You helped develop these modifications?" he asked Sarah directly. "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah responded, her voice carrying quiet pride. "After winning my first gold medal, I realized I could do more than just compete. I wanted to create solutions that would help others achieve their independence. The car isn't just transportation. It's a symbol of what's possible when we refuse to accept limitations." Marcus pulled out another document, a letter from the Children's Hospital of Atlanta. "Sarah visits the Pediatric Rehabilitation Unit twice a month," he explained. "She works with young patients, showing them that their challenges don't define their future. Last year, she established a scholarship fund for young athletes with adaptive needs." The courtroom remained silent, but it was a silence filled with respect rather than tension. The morning light had shifted, creating a warm glow that seemed to emphasize the significance of the moment. 3 weeks ago," Marcus continued, his voice softening, "one of our young athletes took her first steps using a new prosthetic leg. Know what she said, Your Honor?" He paused, emotion evident in his voice. "She said, 'I want to be like Miss Sarah, someone who helps others see what they can do, not what they can't.'" Judge Barnes removed his glasses again, but this time it wasn't a gesture of frustration. He looked at Sarah with new eyes, seeing beyond the traffic citation to the layers of impact she had created in her community. "Your latest gold medal," he said, noticing the edge of it peeking from her gym bag. "Tell me about that race." Sarah stepped forward slightly, her posture reflecting both humility and pride. "It wasn't just my victory, Your Honor. Every medal represents the team of people who believed in possibilities, the engineers who worked on adaptive equipment, the young athletes who inspire me daily, my coach who never let me settle for less than my best, and every person who has supported adaptive sports programs." The judge nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He wasn't just seeing an athlete or a traffic violation. He was witnessing the ripple effect of one person's determination to create positive change, both on and off the track. Judge Barnes sat back in his chair, the weight of his earlier assumptions pressing heavily on his conscience. The morning light had shifted, casting long shadows across his bench, reminding him of how quickly perspectives could change. He thought of his 16-year-old daughter, Emma, who had recently joined her high school track team, dreaming of athletic scholarships and Olympic glory. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, his tone now warm with genuine interest, "would you tell me more about your mentorship program? The one at Children's Hospital." Sarah's face brightened with enthusiasm. "Of course, Your Honor. We currently work with 25 young athletes, ages 8 to 18. Each one has their own unique story and dreams." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo album. "With your permission." The judge nodded, and Sarah approached the bench. She opened the album to reveal photographs of smiling children and teenagers, each engaged in various athletic activities. "This is Jamie." She pointed to a young girl beaming at the camera, wearing a running blade. 6 months ago, she wouldn't even consider joining her school's track team. Last week, she won her first regional competition. Judge Barnes studied the photographs, seeing in each face the same determination he recognized in his own daughter's eyes when she talked about her dreams. He noticed a calendar in Sarah's bag, filled with highlighted dates and appointments. "You maintain this schedule while training for international competition?" he asked, genuine admiration creeping into his voice. "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah replied. "The training is demanding, but these kids, they're the real inspiration. They show up every day, ready to push their limits, to redefine what's possible." She turned to another page in the album. "This is our annual adaptive sports camp. Last year, we had over 100 participants from across the Southeast." Marcus stepped forward again, placing a DVD on the bench. "This is from last month's Paralympic qualifier, Your Honor. The same event Sarah was heading to that morning. Would you like to see it?" The judge glanced at his docket, then at the clerk, who nodded imperceptibly. They had time. He gestured to the bailiff, who wheeled forward a monitor kept in the courtroom for evidence presentations. The video began playing, showing Sarah at the starting line. The camera zoomed in on her face, the same focused expression she'd worn in that years-old photograph, but now tempered with experience and wisdom. As the race unfolded, the courtroom watched in collective awe as Sarah powered around the track, her movements a perfect blend of grace and strength. "You see that young girl in the stands?" Sarah pointed to the corner of the screen. "That's Lisa, one of our mentees. She told me afterward that watching this race made her believe anything was possible." Judge Barnes removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose thoughtfully. The morning's proceedings had become far more than a simple traffic violation hearing. In Sarah's story, he saw reflections of every person who had ever been judged too quickly, categorized too easily. "Your Honor," Marcus spoke softly, "Sarah's not just an athlete who wins medals. She's someone who changes lives every day, who shows others that barriers are meant to be broken, and that true champions lift others as they rise." The judge looked at his watch, not with impatience as he had earlier, but with a new awareness of how precious time was, and how moments of understanding could transform everything. Judge Barnes rose from his bench, an unusual action that drew curious glances from the courtroom staff. He straightened his robes and cleared his throat, his decision evident in his bearing. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been present earlier, "this court finds itself in an extraordinary position this morning. What began as a routine traffic hearing has become a lesson in courage, dedication, and the importance of looking beyond first impressions." He lifted the citation paper from his desk, studying it one last time. "The law exists to protect and serve our community. Today I've learned that you do the same, albeit in a different way." He placed the citation aside. "This court hereby dismisses the charge, with one condition." Sarah stood attentively, her posture reflecting both grace and curiosity. The morning sun had reached its peak, flooding the courtroom with natural light that seemed to underscore the moment's significance. Next month, the judge continued, our district is hosting its annual Youth Leadership Summit. We expect over 300 young people to attend. He paused, making eye contact with Sarah. I would consider it a personal honor if you would serve as our keynote speaker. A murmur of approval rippled through the courtroom. Marcus smiled broadly, clutching his portfolio with pride. The clerk had stopped typing entirely, caught up in the unfolding scene. Your Honor, Sarah responded, her voice steady, but touched with emotion. I would be honored. But may I make a suggestion? Judge Barnes nodded, intrigued. Instead of a traditional speech, what if we organized an interactive session? We could bring some of our adaptive sports equipment, maybe even set up a mini demonstration. Her eyes lit up with possibility. Show these young leaders that innovation and inclusion go hand in hand. The judge's face broke into a genuine smile. Even better. And he glanced at Officer Roberts, who had written the original citation and was present in court for other cases. Perhaps the police department would be interested in learning more about adaptive vehicles and the athletes who drive them. Officer Roberts stood. Yes, Your Honor. In fact, our community outreach program could benefit from understanding more about adaptive technologies. Maybe we could collaborate on a workshop. Sarah turned to face the officer, extending her hand. I'd be happy to help arrange that. Understanding breeds empathy, and empathy builds stronger communities. Judge Barnes watched the exchange with satisfaction. He picked up his gavel but paused before bringing it down. Ms. Mitchell, there's one more thing. He reached into his desk and withdrew a business card. My daughter Emma is on her high school track team. She's been struggling with confidence lately. Would you consider? I'd love to meet her, Sarah replied before he could finish. Perhaps she'd like to help with the Youth Leadership Summit presentation. Sometimes the best way to build confidence is to help others find theirs. The judge nodded, emotion flickering briefly across his face. He brought down the gavel, making the dismissal official, but this sharp sound felt less like an ending and more like the beginning of something meaningful. As Sarah gathered her belongings, several people approached her, the bailiff asking about the adaptive sports camp for his nephew, the clerk inquiring about volunteer opportunities, and Officer Roberts discussing details for the upcoming workshop. What had started as a potential setback had transformed into an opportunity to create even more positive change in the community. 1 month later, the Atlanta Youth Leadership Summit buzzed with energy. The main auditorium, typically arranged with formal rows of seats, had been transformed into an interactive space. Adaptive sports equipment lined the walls, and a small track had been set up in the center of the room. The morning light streamed through large windows, illuminating the faces of hundreds of young leaders eagerly waiting for the event to begin. Sarah Mitchell stood backstage, adjusting her Paralympic team jacket. Next to her, Emma Barnes, Judge Barnes's daughter, was helping organize note cards for the presentation, her track team uniform worn proudly. The past month had seen Emma training regularly with Sarah, not just in running techniques, but in leadership and public speaking. Ready? Sarah asked, giving Emma an encouraging smile. Ready, Emma replied, standing taller. Still can't believe how that traffic ticket turned into all of this. Judge Barnes, dressed in a casual suit rather than his judicial robes, approached them. The auditorium's full, he announced. And guess what? 3 other districts have requested similar programs for their youth summits. Sarah nodded, thinking of how one moment of misunderstanding had blossomed into unprecedented opportunity. The adaptive driving workshop with the police department had been so successful that it was being implemented as part of their standard training program. Officer Roberts had become a regular volunteer at the Paralympic Training Center, helping coordinate community outreach events. The lights dimmed, signaling it was time. Sarah wheeled onto the stage, followed by Emma and 6 other young athletes from her mentorship program. The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't the polite, obligatory kind. It was genuine enthusiasm fueled by the stories they'd already heard about this remarkable collaboration. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. "A month ago, I stood in a courtroom, facing a traffic violation. Today, I stand before you to talk about something much more important, the power of looking beyond our first impressions." She gestured to Emma, who stepped forward with natural poise. "My dad taught me that justice means looking at the whole picture," Emma shared. "Working with Sarah has shown me that leadership means helping others see their full potential." The presentation unfolded with demonstrations of adaptive sports equipment, personal stories from young athletes, and interactive sessions where audience members could experience adaptive technologies firsthand. Judge Barnes watched from the side, noting how every person in the room was fully engaged, barriers and preconceptions melting away with each passing moment. Near the end, Sarah unveiled the summit's biggest surprise, a new citywide adaptive sports initiative, supported by both the judicial system and law enforcement, designed to create more inclusive opportunities in schools and community centers. "Today isn't about me," Sarah concluded, looking out at the sea of inspired faces. "It's about every person who's ever been misjudged, every dream that seemed impossible, and every barrier waiting to be transformed into a bridge." Sometimes, the most powerful changes begin with a simple moment of understanding. As the audience rose in a standing ovation, Judge Barnes stepped forward to shake Sarah's hand. Their eyes met in mutual understanding. This was more than a happy ending to a traffic ticket. It was the beginning of a ripple effect that would touch countless lives. Outside, the Atlanta sun shone brightly on the building's facade, where a new banner hung proudly: "Breaking Barriers, Building Bridges, Atlanta Youth Leadership Summit." Inside, the future was being reshaped, one changed perspective at a time.